Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's interesting, isn't it? I hadn't really given the topic of boycotts that much thought. It seems to be a fact of life, in a way. Is it good or is it bad? But then I sort of started to think about my own behaviour, and I realised that I once adored Ben & Jerry's ice cream, and I no longer buy it. And I also remember a few years ago that I'd always, without a second thought, used Gillette razors. And then suddenly I thought, wait a minute, no, you're attacking me in this ad. You disapprove of me. So in fact, I started using another small brand, which was enterprising enough, called Harry's, just to make us, hay while the sun shone, if you like. So I have done boycotts of my own. I think the point is this, really, is that my colleagues here have, on the whole, talked about the market. I think that the problem comes when it's the public sector or when it is things that can't be measured so easily. And the New Culture Forum, when we discuss these things, without question, one of the most asked questions that we have is, well, we agree with you, but what do we do about it? And my answer to that is that you have more power than you think, right? So it's either in consumer terms, as I just mentioned, and it did have the most enormous effect on Gillette. They dropped about 10% market share, and they dropped that advertising campaign and rue the day. So you can do that, and you can stop eating ice cream or whatever. But what about sort of government bodies or sort of quasi-government bodies or institutions? So a very, very good example from recent years would be the National Trust. Now, of course, I should say that I'm talking about this from my point of view. Your point of view, your political views might be entirely different. So I am talking about my point of view. So obviously, with the National Trust, I abhor their decolonisation agenda. I don't think they're doing what they should be doing. So if one were a member, one would cancel one's membership. Apparently, thousands of people have done this. The point about public institutions and commercial institutions is that money is king. And if you hit them in the pocket, it does have an effect. And I would say that in the kind of system that we have now, in this, in Britain, the party political system, it doesn't hear people, it doesn't respond to people, even though it says it does. And so therefore, you have said, right, well, what actually can I do? I can not approve of this. I can stop going to the British Library whilst they continually take out statues and pour scorn on their own archives when they stop doing what they're meant to do. So therefore, I would say that I'm pro-boycott in that sense. In the case of GB News, for example, I was against that boycott. I would be, because I support GB News. But the fact is, I think the difference there is that before the thing had even got going, there was an attempt to actually strangle it at birth. The difference is, the wonderful thing about this kind of situation is that good ideas should trump bad ideas. So ultimately, whatever you think about GB News, it didn't work. It's still with us. And what that really means is that the idea was a better one than the boycotting idea. Finally, just look around you and see, and just think about your own life and your own hinterland and the things, in fact, that you enjoy that you no longer do. I've got a whole long list, and it wasn't sort of something that was conscious. But, for example, I no longer watch the Oscars simply because I don't want to hear the endless pontificating and politics. This is happening as well with sporting events. Same thing is happening all over. People, like Oscars, for example, used to get about 50 million viewers. Last time around, it got 9. I would say that that is a boycott. It's just not organised as such, but people showing their power in that situation has had and will have an effect. It just means that maybe you might lose some things along the way. But the fact is that these industries will end up killing themselves anyway if they carry on using the inappropriate platform. But I do think that there is a kind of democracy about things such as boycotts. And I think that we do it, all of us, much more than we actually think we do. But I think that we should now enter a golden age of boycotting. Thank you. In answer to the lady there about is there anything new under the sun? Well, I hope there is, because we've still got an hour to fill. No, look, I think the half an hour. I'm being frivolous, but look, this is a very, very important issue, but I think we can't be confused about, we can't confuse council culture with boycotts. I think the point was made that they are slightly different things. I think you can boycott in response to council culture, and I think that that is an honourable thing to do. I mean, how would you do that? So, for example, take the University of Sussex at the moment, Professor Kathleen Stock, right, is facing a huge campaign. You know who I mean by Kathleen Stock, yes? To get her fired, basically. Now, okay, it's outrageous, but then, well, you could say, well, what should people outside do? Well, stop applying to University of Sussex. This sounds maybe rather airy-fairy, but actually, once this sort of thing happens, just like viewing figures, it has an effect. It has an effect. That is a response, a boycott response to council culture. I think there's a broader point as well when it comes to, say, for example, free speech. People will always say they don't want to boycott free speech or whatever. They're usually actually talking about cancel culture anyway. What worries me slightly is that younger people, by that I mean like 20s and 30s, what I find, in my life and my experience, anecdotally, is that there's not even any more the pretense to believe in free speech. That's something quite new. It used to always be, when you had debates like this, that people would say, I believe in free speech, and the other person would say, I believe in free speech, but, etc. But you could at least engage. Whereas I think now there are a lot of people who actually do not believe in the actual idea of free speech. They believe in safety instead. And I think that, they think it is expendable. That's a terrible road we're going down, but we are going down it. I just finish with one remark, basically, which is that we do all have these choices, and whether we like it or not, life is politicized. So we have to respond on that basis, I would say. Everything is politicized, so we have to respond on that basis. Yes, to the gentleman's point there, I guess, I think one of the reasons, of course, corporations shouldn't, have undue influence, but in a way it's sort of beside the point now, because basically corporations and broadcast media and almost anyone else you care to mention all have exactly the same values, and they all sing from the same hymn sheet. And in fact, often the public sector gets it in the neck for this sort of thing, but in fact, the most woke places now are HR departments in corporations. In fact, they virtually do enact critical race theory. They just call it something else. I think that, so that's certainly the case. In relation to what the lady there at the back said about class, I hope I'm not misunderstanding what you were saying, but I think there's definitely the case now that the views, oh dear, this is really general. I'm being very general now, but basically we've seen the most extraordinary reemergence of outright snobbery in this country. And it's, it's sort of expressed in different ways. So, as my colleague said, about being nice. you know, whatever that means. But I think that we have seen an extraordinary since, well, Brexit actually exposed it in a way. The difference is, you might say, well, so what? What I would say is that the people who are the snobs have the power. They just have the power. And they are the motors behind so much of what we are talking about. I would slightly take issue with what Nick says about courage. I think for many people, it is an absolutely realistic reaction to a situation in which they are really going to be wiped out. I mean, you know, we all like to think we have courage, and obviously Nick had huge courage in what he faced. But the fact is, you know, you're talking about your livelihood, you're talking, more and more people are going to work into their, you hear this anecdotally, friends and family, and they will do this, they will take part, or they, in one case I'm thinking of now, actually have to give something on, you know, unconscious bias training. They fundamentally disagree with the basis of this, but they would lose their job, right? And so these are the if you like, the unspoken victims of this. We hear a lot about artists and all the rest of it, but I'm talking about people in the workplace. In reply to a gentleman here, sorry, I can't quite, were you saying, when did I stop using Gillette?
When did you forgive Gillette?
When would I forgive him? I don't really care. I mean, look, these people, they're just, it's money. It's profit. You know, I have no loyalty. You know, I think they've, you know, any corporation which sort of somehow or other tries to co-opt me into their views, I will absolutely have no part of. So I think that the Overton window is getting smaller and smaller.
Just on that issue of forgiveness, and Peter, lastly.
Yeah, just to take up a few points. Also from the panel, Jodie says about we've got to be careful because you know, we won't be able to have discussions like this. The point was made from the floor. I'd say in a way we're not having discussions like this. I mean, you know, I remember one thing that really astonished me a while ago when the subject of Islam and Islamophobia came up, people saying, oh, well, you see, we're much more at ease now than when Salman Rushdie wrote the Satanic Verses. That kind of wouldn't happen. Yeah, sure it wouldn't happen because no one would publish it. So we're at that stage, right? We're at that stage. We are entirely at that stage. So we should stop saying we have got to be careful. We are at it. And I'd say that the most crucial part of all of this is that people self-censor anyway. You can bring in as many laws as you like now, but people have had such fear instilled into them that they actually will self-censor anyway. Our great artists, you know, the creative industry, meant to be the most, you know, beacons of free speech. When did they say anything that was going to actually anger or provoke anyone? It's been years. And they're not going to. I would say the reason for this, and it comes back to my original point about what we can do, when the gentleman over there says, you know, we've got to rise up and stop this, is that I believe there's been a long march through all of our institutions, including the police, and indeed the police now are social engineers. They no longer care about crime much. They're about imposing things, right? And they are absolutely working, you know, if you like, for the liberal establishment. I think it's been a long march, and we're seeing the results of it. So the way to do that is to instill fear into people for believing, you know, what they might want to believe. And the only way, therefore, is not through voting, not because you shouldn't vote, but because no party is offering any real opposition to any of this. Certainly not Boris Johnson, whatever you might say. You've just got to take it into your own hands in a peaceful way. By that I mean by boycotting things. And not actually, you know, not buying things, not going places, not watching things. And eventually the penny will drop. Thank you.